So when I get into my hammer it stance, so if this is my contact point, again, I'm going to be at a 45-degree angle. Contact point is going to be in line with my belly button, and that target line is going to be running down my right side. And so as I turn, now notice my racket is directly over that center line. And so the first plane that we have to work with is over here, what we call the racquet plane. So this is what we call the racquet plane. And the racket wants to swing in its plane over here. So if I were to swing my arm, it wants to swing in a straight path, kind of like an orbit. If I swing this racket sideways, like this, and I swing in a flat circle this way, there are 360 degrees to a circle. So every degree that my face is off, I'm hitting the ball a different direction. If I can get my racket, though, to swing over here like this and put that circle now on its edge, if I contact the ball, it's going to go straight. So as I'm swinging over here, the racket wants to swing in this path, and I would hit the ball toward the target. Now what happens though is my shoulders engaged, and so this is the second plane that we talk about, and we call this the shoulder plane. And so my shoulders, they turn. And so my shoulders are responsible, if I'm hitting the ball this way, my shoulders are responsible for aiming the height of my shot. So as I'm rotating, my shoulders are going to adjust for how high I want to launch the ball. And so when I put the two together, this is what happens, and this is pretty cool. So if I start here in my stance again, and I'm going to swat, that's one reason I want to keep my racket to the right. And so many of the pros, you see them when they get ready, they do the unit turn. They say the unit turn. Well, one of the other reasons that we do the unit turn is to set our racket over in the racquet plane. If I don't do a unit turn and I do this, this is one of the death moves of the forehand I see a lot of players do. They go like this. Now the elbow's behind them, the racket is back behind them, or they step in, and now you can see my elbow behind me. So now the racket is way behind my back. So to get to the ball and to get to the target, it has to swing in a flat circle. And if I do that, now I'm going to start spraying the ball everywhere. If you watch the professionals, all of them turn and they set the racket over here on the right side of their body. Some of them take the racket back a little further, yes, but their shoulders turn with them. So they're getting even more of a unit turn, but they're keeping their hands to the right side of the body. And so then as they swing, what's happening is the racket is going down, and the racket is going to come down through, make contact, and then it wants to extend and keep going back around the circle. But what happens is that our shoulders begin to turn. And so if I could start with this racket, if I say I start it here, and it swings all the way around this hula hoop, that's one full rotation. So if I start with my racket here in the racquet plane, swing down, swing across, but what's going to happen is as I get into here, my shoulders, since my shoulders are rotating, they're pulling the racquet plane apart. And so what happens is as I swing, the racquet plane gets pulled as I'm turning. There we go. So you're going to start over here at the racket and the racquet plane, and as you start to drop the racket, now you're going to notice that the racket is becoming in line with your target. And so this is the position that we see all the time where the butt cap is pointing at the target. Notice the racket has just dropped down on the racquet plane there. And then as it continues to go towards the target, as soon as your shoulders engage, what happens is the racket's path is pulled across your body. Then the racket's going to finish on the other side of your body, down around your bicep. But if you notice, this is just one rotation of the racquet plane. And so as I'm swinging down the racquet plane, because my shoulders are turning, it pulls the racquet plane apart, and it turns the racquet plane across my body as my shoulders are turning, which makes the racket's path look like this. And so this is what we call a sine curve. It's a circle that's been pulled apart. And so let me go for a second. All right, you're fine. So as the racket comes down into the racket plane and then we turn our shoulders, the racket is going to naturally want to finish over here by the bicep, because if we look at our hula hoop, when that hula hoop, when this racket plane is, because it's a circle, is pulled apart, now the other side seems to go down. So think about this ball on a string. If I was wanting it to swing in line with the center service line here towards the camera, if I wanted to hit the camera, it would be easier if I swung it like this and let go. If I tried to hit the camera by swinging it around in a circle this way, it would be so much harder to time it perfectly to get it to go straight. But if I could get this ball to swing on its edge this way, it's pretty easy to line it up with the camera. And so again, notice how for that to happen, my arms have to be out on the right side of my body. Again, notice how my elbows on the right of my body, my hands are on the right of my body. It makes it very easy to line this ball up with the target line directly at the camera right now. So if I were to take the ball back this way, I've got to stop, change direction, and then come back around. And so many of you are doing that with your racket. And so what you're doing is you're in your ready position. Then when the ball comes, you're taking your racket back like this. You have to stop it and then go through. And so this is that loop that we talk about. And so you hear about this loop. This loop is really where the racket wants to swing. It wants to swing like this. Okay? So notice as I come down and through, I'm going to extend. To extend, I have to allow my hand to roll and let the racket roll over. I can reach further that way. Also, that's going to make sure the racket goes over the top of the ball. And then by just turning my shoulders, so if I were just try this, just swing your arm real wild and then turn your shoulders. I'm not taking the racket over here. Just by turning my shoulders, the racket naturally goes to that direction. And so to prove that point again, if I take this ball and swing it, all I have to do is just turn my shoulders and the ball naturally goes over here and finishes down. Again, it's the hula hoop that I showed you. If it starts at the top, it wants to go back around. But when I pull the hula hoop apart, now the path goes down, up, and down again. It's that sine curve. And so by turning my shoulders, I'm pulling apart the racket plane. It's jumping onto the shoulder plane. And now the shoulder plane is pulling the racket plane across. So I'm not swinging my racket across. If I did that, I'd pull it off the racket plane from the get-go. So I'm trying to keep my racket in line with the target, but my shoulders then are engaging and they're rotating and pulling that racket onto the shoulder plane. If I swing this way, I've pulled the racket off the target line super fast. It's much easier to hit the ball to a target if the racket's momentum, if the racket's path, if everything is lining up toward the target. If I'm swinging and pulling the racket off of that target line, you're going to miss the ball. It's going to pull the ball off the target path. You're going to have mishits. You're going to make errors and you're going to lose matches. And so work on trying to keep the racket out on the racket plane. Then as you come down, as you're making contact, the racket will go across the body if you're turning your shoulders. Okay? So as I'm hitting, I'm turning my shoulders. Again, just like we've practiced in some of the other videos. If you haven't checked out the hammer video, click on the card now. Check out the hammer video. As I'm doing that, I'm going to leverage into the shot. I'm going to use all of these concepts together to build one powerful forehand. And so all of these concepts all work together so that way that you get more power with less energy. So that way you can hammer the ball. All right, and so one key to remember is that the racket plane is a circle, and so a plane is where something is swinging, and for something to swing, it moves around a fixed point. And so if the center of this hula hoop is a fixed point and this racket we're swinging around that fixed point, that's its plane. And so the racket plane is on the right side of our body in line with our chest, and it's over here in line with the target. So that's the racket plane. And then as I turn, I'm using my shoulder plane. And so the shoulder plane is my shoulders making a T with my spine. And so again, I can change the shoulder plane because the shoulders are rotating around a fixed point. And so I can change the shoulder plane by adjusting my stance. And so we see a lot of players as they're hitting, you know, they're rotating like this. And so they're using their legs, and you'll see that a lot of times their left leg is in line with their spine. And so you're seeing a lot of shots like this. And so they're rotating, but those shoulders are the shoulder plane, and they are how we adjust the height of our racket plane. So the racket is over here, and that kind of controls the horizontal aiming. Now my shoulders, they combine to control the vertical aiming. My racket face combines to control the amount of spin, which also controls how much the ball is going to dive down into the court. And so by using those three controls together, that helps me aim my shot. All right, guys, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put some of these concepts together when we're practicing. So we've worked on dropping the ball and hitting straight down the service line. Then we were talking about dropping the ball and applying the leverage and working on feeling the leverage when we practice our net drill. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to practice keeping the racket out in line with the target in the racket plane. So I'm in my hammer stance, I'm lining up, the center point is in line with my belly button, the racket is now going to be pointed up. And now from this position, what's going to happen is I'm going to drop the ball, I'm going to let the racket drop down in its plane, and then I'm going to turn, square up the racket at contact, I'm going to leverage into the shot, and I'm going to extend out toward the target. So I'm still not going to finish on my left side because I'm not turning very hard. So that finish is dictated by how hard I'm turning, not necessarily how fast I'm swinging, because if I wanted to, I could swing over here and hit the ball. I could keep my racket on the right side of my body the whole time. I could do like a machine gun hit without really slowing down, and I could hit the ball out over here. See, all I have to do is roll my wrist and rotate out toward the target. I don't have to turn my shoulders and still hit that ball. And so now we're going to put it all together. I'm going to start with the racket out over here in the racket plane. I'm going to drop the ball, I'm going to let it drop, and I'm going to rotate out. Now if the ball goes to the left, then I know that I need to swing out to the right a little bit more. So again, I'm going to start with the racket out in the racket plane. I'm going to drop the ball and go through. And then I'm going to work on just kind of gently turning. And so notice how by even a little bit of a turn, the racket wants to start going to the left. The racket wants to go over there because it has to. Because as soon as I turn my shoulders, I'm pulling that swing path, I'm pulling that hula hoop apart. And so even with a little bit of a shoulder turn, the racket wants to naturally go to the left side. I'm not taking the racket over there. That's just where it wants to go. So I'm going to start with the racket up, drop, and turn through. And so work on practicing this way as you start to develop a feel for your shot. Don't just go out and hit the ball as hard as you can. Work this way. It's a much more controlled manner as you're going to start to develop a feel on how you're going to hammer the ball.